Good evening. Welcome to the Glazov Gang. Tonight, a very special episode with a very special guest, Geert Wilders, the founder and leader of the Party for Freedom, which is currently the fourth largest party in the Dutch parliament. Mr. Wilders is best known for his brave stance against and truth-telling about Islam. And he is the author of Marked for Death, Islam's War Against the West and Me. Geert, what honor and privilege to have you here.
It's an honor to be on your show, really. It's a pleasure to be here today.
Thank you very much. Let's begin with a general, simple question. What are you up to lately?
Well, I'm in the United States now to find support in any possible way for establishing a kind of international organization, an international freedom alliance for all forces that want to fight the Islamization of our free societies all over the world, from America to Australia to my own continent, Europe. And, well, I've been here now for a few days, and I must say that it's very promising.
Thank you. Fantastic. You gave quite a speech very recently in your parliament, how to confront the Islamic State.
Yeah.
And you were saying, okay, this is great that we're involved in an air campaign against the Islamic State, etc. over there. But what are we doing about the Netherlands? What are we doing about protecting our security? Can you talk a bit about that?
Yes, of course, I support every military action against the Islamic State, both in Iraq and Syria. As a matter of fact, the Dutch F-16s are bombing along with the American airplanes. But I believe more important even than that, and that's why I'm elected, an elected Dutch parliamentarian, is to make sure that our own country is safe. Not only Iraq and Syria, but our own country is safe. And all the politicians are, I have to say, ignoring that problem. They are fooling the constituents by saying, my own Prime Minister, Mr. Rutte, is doing that, but even your own President, Mr. Obama, your Secretary of State, I heard him 2 days ago when I arrived to the United States, people say, well, the Islamic State has nothing to do with Islam. They are misusing Islam. And I have to tell you, it's all lies. The problem we face today in our free Western society is that we have imported millions of people from Islamic countries with a background, with a culture, with an ideology of hate, a totalitarian ideology. And I believe that if we don't want to see in our own countries happening what we are seeing today in Iraq and Syria, we should fight against the Islamization of our own free society, which means that we should stop the Islamization of our societies, that we should stop the immigration from Islamic countries, that we should expel all the people who have even the slightest sympathy for the Islamic State, that we should encourage the voluntary repatriation of people from Islamic countries. We should de-Islamize our societies in order to stay free. And that is the point that I made in our parliament, that we should not only fight the Islamic State, but we should fight the Islamic monster in our own free societies.
Well, you even brought up, why are they even stopping these people who want to go fight for the Islamic State? Yeah. Why would they stop them? Why not let them go and just to never come back? Yes. But the case right now is that they're keeping them in the Netherlands.
They're keeping them not only in the Netherlands. I mean, it was a decision even of the United Nations. Yeah. And I believe almost every Western country has a policy that if a jihadist wants to leave to fight in Iraq, to fight in Syria, that they will stop them. And I mean, if they would arrest them, I could even have the slightest kind of sympathy. But they don't even do that. In Holland, not so long ago, 41 jihadists were stopped from leaving the Netherlands who wanted to go to Syria to fight for the Islamic State. And they stopped them. They took their passport and sent them on the street. So now they are highly motivated with a lot of skills, terroristic skills, without a passport. So they make our own streets, our own airports, our own train stations, our own malls, very dangerous places to be. So I don't understand it. If you want to leave, let people leave. We are a free country. If you want to go to Syria and Iraq, please go, but never come back. Mm-hmm. And we should never allow you to come back. We should close our borders for anybody who is leaving. I'd rather have them chop off heads in Syria than in Amsterdam.
Now, you're speaking words of wisdom, but this is not the case, right?
It's not the case.
And like why isn't it the case? It's this policy of multiculturalism, it's this leftist vision. Yeah. Tell us a bit about how the left has constructed these boundaries of how we can run our Western societies?
You know, the sad thing is that it's not only the left, it's the so-called right and conservatives in many European countries as well. I mean, Mr. Cameron, he's not a leftist politician. He's the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. And he says, once again, that Islam has nothing to do with terrorism, that the Islamic State has nothing to do with Islam. How stupid can you be? My own Prime Minister of my own country says the same. Most of the European and Western leaders, like I said before, fool the people by ignoring the fact that what we are seeing is the core business of Islam. How more Islamic than an Islamic State do you want to have it? I mean, the killing of people, the chopping off of heads of people from America, from the United Kingdom, that we see almost every week on TV now. I mean, it's written down in the Quran. Read Surah 47, verse 4. It says that when you meet the unbelievers, smite their necks until you have a bloodbath among them. This is what's happening today. It's 100% Islam, and the sad thing is that it's supported by so many Muslims. The misconception that it's only a small part of the Muslim people is wrong. It's a lie. We made a survey in the Netherlands, and it proved that 65% of the Islamic people in the Kingdom of the Netherlands thought that people who went to fight for jihad in Syria, they were heroes. They considered them as heroes. It's 65%. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of people only in the Netherlands. So it's not a small group. It's a small group that go and fight the jihad and use violence. But it's an enormous group that support it. So indeed, we have an enormous problem in our society.
Absolutely, and sometimes also I think, you know, even if it was 1%, I mean, 1%, it only takes 1 or 5 people to do a lot of damage. So it's not Muslims necessarily, it's Islam. And so we have to be honest about what Islam teaches, even if 5 people try to carry out a massacre.
I fully agree with that. I fully agree with that, but it's even worse. That it's not 1 or 2%, but that it's 65% of the people who think that jihadists are heroes. Can you imagine? 65%.
Geert Wilders, tell us about the state of Islamization of your country and of Europe in general. What's the situation right now?
Well, the situation is very bad, and now with the Islamic State and all the people, all the jihadists wanted to leave, it gets very clear to a lot of people. Only in Europe, thousands of people want to fight for the jihad in Syria and Iraq today, and they want to leave, and they are returning to their home countries. In my own country, in my own city where I live, The Hague, the place where our parliament is, where the government is seated. We saw, not so long ago, a few weeks and a few months ago, we saw people rallying in the street with flags with swastikas, with texts like Jews should be killed, kill the Jews, and things like that. And it's getting worse. It's getting worse every day. And the sad thing is that we did not only import a problem, but like I always said, the biggest disease in Europe today is called cultural relativism, the lie of so many politicians that all cultures are equal, and that we should not really say that Islam is the problem. Let me tell you, Islam is not so much a religion. Islam is a totalitarian ideology like communism or fascism that at the end of the day wants to dominate all of us. And if you are a non-Muslim, a Christian, an apostate, or a Jew, you will pay a very tough price.
In your youth, and I think you're still at that stage.
I hope.
Absolutely, but you traveled to Israel and fell in love with Israel.
I did.
Tell us about that.
Yes, when I was 17 years old, before I had to go to the army, that at that time was compulsory in the Netherlands, I wanted to see the world, and I knew a lot about Israel. I had friends and family living there. So when I was 17, I went there, and one of my former girlfriends lived there, and she married at that time with an Israeli, so I lived with her. And then later I traveled all over the country, and I worked from Eilat to a bread factory in Jerusalem, but also in Judea and Samaria, in a moshav and in a kibbutz. And I did for 2 years almost many things in Israel. And even at that time, I felt not only at home, but I saw the fight that they were fighting. At that time, it was not so much from the Lebanese border, but it was from the Jordan border, certainly in the Jordan Valley, where people infiltrated. And I remember that we had to go to find a shelter, even at that time. And the army came, and with magnesium flares, they saw the terrorists coming from Jordan to Israel. And at that time, I was only a teenager. I have to be honest about that. I was not into politics. I was into having a drink, finding a girl. I mean, like any teenager did.
Okay.
But at that time, I already saw that, well, hey, here's a country, a democratic country, a country that shares our values, and it's surrounded by total hate. Not only enemies, but total hate.
And you visited some Arab nations as well.
I visited almost every Arab nation.
And what was your experience there? What's one or two memories? Or
besides the hatred towards Israel, I remember very well when I went to Egypt at that time, for the first time. I returned many times, but the first time as a teenager. They were friendly people. They took me into their house and shared tea with them. But as soon as they spoke about Israel, it was hatred. It was very, very nasty. Since then, I traveled almost through all the Islamic world. I was in Afghanistan, in Iraq, in Iran many times, in Syria, in Egypt, in Tunisia, and almost every country. And what I saw is that they were often friendly people, but they were all the victim of the totalitarianism, not only of the rulers, and once again, every country is different. Iran is not to be compared with Syria, and Egypt is not Jordan, but they all have the yoke of Islam that they have to deal with. And this is a terrible thing. People are being afraid, people that I believe should, at the end of the day, liberate themselves from the yoke of the Islam, because if they don't, there will never be. I mean, people were fooled once again with a so-called Arab Spring. Well, look what is happening today. There was no Arab Spring. There was a very dark, bitter winter. And Islam and democracy, Islam and freedom are totally incompatible. So as long as Islam is a dominant ideology in the region, you will not find any freedom and any democracy. And the people who live there deserve freedom and democracy. So I hope and I advocate that they leave Islam.
Geert Wilders, you represent freedom, and yet we have a situation where the UK at one point didn't even let you into the country.
Yeah.
Talk a bit about your own experience with, I would say, the persecution of you. I mean, we have a situation where you're not allowed in several nations, but yet jihadists and those who support jihad are allowed.
Yes. If you speak out against Islam, if you don't talk nonsense that there is a difference between Islam and Islamism, or radical Islam or moderate Islam, if you just say the truth, and there is only one Islam, and that is the Islam of the Quran, the Islam of the Sharia, the Islam of the Hadith and the life of Muhammad. This is the Islam. Muhammad was really, if you follow and study his life, is an example. That's why he's important. Example for so many Muslims, billions of Muslims in the world. Muhammad is an example. And he was not a prophet. He was a warlord. He was a pedophile. He was somebody who killed and slaughtered and beheaded Jewish tribes when he went from Mecca to Medina when Islam was founded.
Banu Qurayza tribe.
Exactly. So this is the Islam that Islam really represents. And if you speak out to that, and what I believe is just telling the truth, not sweetening it, but telling the truth, then you pay a very high price. You are threatened. I'm threatened by the Pakistani Taliban, by Al-Qaeda, by Syria jihadis. But you are also being labeled as an extremist, what you are not. You are taken to court. I have been taken to court a few years ago for making a short movie called Fitna. And I was acquitted. And now again, I will most probably be taken to court because I said that I asked my voters if they wanted more or less Moroccans. And they said less. And I have to tell you, nobody in Holland wants more Moroccans, not only because they are Moroccans, but especially because they represent the group with the highest crime statistics. And of all the jihadis in Holland leaving for Syria today, 80% are people from Moroccan origin. So it's...
But that's interpreted by the way our culture is because of how the left has constructed it as racist.
It's called as xenophobe, as racist, as not being politically correct. But still, the good thing is that even though you are prosecuted, you are threatened, and the leftists and the media don't like it at all, that the public has changed for the better in the last few years. I mean, we made another poll not so long ago, my party and an independent polling bureau, and it proved that 65% of the 70 million Dutchmen found that the Islamic culture should not be part of the Netherlands. And this is an enormous promising result, that 2 out of 3 Dutchmen believe that Islam is not part of the Netherlands. And this is also the reality. So people on the street believe that we should not be Islamized, that Islam means only less freedom and more violence. And unfortunately, the gap between the Vox Populi and the political elite is still enormous,
Right.
but things are changing.
Can you talk a bit about your safety issues, your own personal life, how this has affected you?
Well, you know, almost exactly 10 years ago, Theo van Gogh, as you might remember, a Dutch prophet, he was a real prophet, and a filmmaker who spoke out against Islam, was brutally murdered and slaughtered in the streets of Amsterdam by broad daylight. It was on November the 2nd, 2004. And I just left my former party in parliament and founded my own party because I wanted to have political room to criticize Islam, which I was not allowed to do in my former party. And 2 days after that murder, not only Ayaan Hirsi Ali, but also myself, we lost our freedom because they found letters on the body of Van Gogh and in his computer that this so-called Hofstad group that killed Mr. Van Gogh were also after us. And I remember very well at the evening of November 4th that they brought me home, and then 2 minutes later the diplomatic police were again at my front door, but with bulletproof jackets and guns in their hands. And they took me away, and they didn't know where. And at the end of the day, after changing cars, I ended up in a military base. And since then I have not been home. 10 years' time. I lived in army barracks. I lived with my wife for half a year in prison cells in order to be safe. There were no safe houses at that time. Now we have a safe house that is as safe as a bank provided by the Dutch government, but they were not there at that time. So that's what I said. It's not about me, by the way, but if you speak out against Islam, you lose your freedom entirely if you grow a certain profile that people know who you are. And for me it proves that, once again, those people that threaten, that make you lose your freedom, they should never be able to win in a free Western society. So we should never let them win and always continue our fight.
I find it incredible that we have a situation, if anybody honestly looked at the ingredients of your life in terms of the threat that you face, how the conclusion could be that Islam is not a violent religion and that you're a threat. But I don't think anybody's hiding from you.
No, and I make the distinction, of course, as everybody should, between the ideology and the people.
Of course.
I mean, it's ridiculous to suggest that all Muslims are criminals. They are not. There are many Muslims that are moderate and nice, normal people, like you and me. But there is only one kind of Islam, and that's the totalitarian ideology that wants to rule any aspect of any people's life, of any society. And we should make a distinction between them. Then again, at the same time, even though not all Muslims are terrorists, unfortunately, like I said before, at least in Holland, 2/3 of them support people who go fight as terrorists in Syria. So we have an enormous problem. That's why, and that's why I'm a politician, we should change our policy. Close the borders from Islamic immigrants. Send criminals out of our country and stop the Islamization. I don't want to see any more mosques built in the Netherlands. I don't want to see any more. I want to shut down all Islamic schools. Imagine young children, boys and girls from 5, 6, 7 years old, being educated with an ideology of hate. This is the worst thing you can do to a child. So stop the Islamization of our societies, and we should start doing that.
And the way we can start doing that is multiculturalism has to be overturned as our official foundation, and that's going to be very difficult.
Yes, certainly. But even more important than fighting multiculturalism is cultural relativism, the idea that all cultures are equal. I believe that our culture, based on Christianity, on Judaism, on humanism, is far better than the, as I always say, the Islamic culture. It's worth less, and I'm proud. You're not a racist if you say that our culture is better than the Islamic culture. I'm proud of our culture. Let's start being tolerant to the people who are tolerant to us, but let's start being intolerant to people and cultures that are intolerant to us. We are not able to do that anymore, and I believe we should.
Absolutely. We have a few minutes left.
Sure.
Tell our viewers, tell me, where was the turning point in Geert Wilders' life where Islam was not a big issue to you, and then it became an issue to you, and you became who you are? Was there an influential figure in your life? Was there a book you read? Was there an event?
Well, there were many influential figures. For instance, an Israeli politician called Ariel Sharon, the former prime minister. I went to his funeral last January. I didn't agree with everything he did, but I thought he was, well, a hero to stand up and to fight against the forces of Islam, both in Lebanon and anywhere else. But I also was a big fan of Ronald Reagan, one of your own former presidents.
I think Margaret Thatcher as well.
Margaret Thatcher especially as well. But, you know, Europe has a different kind of history when it comes to immigration than the United States. We import immigrants, certainly in the Netherlands and France and Germany, from people from Arab countries. So I went to travel to all those countries. I studied in the French Ministry of Foreign Affairs. I went to the parliament in Germany. I thought, well, what is happening in this society with all those immigrants from Algeria, from Morocco, from all those Arab countries? And I traveled throughout the Middle East itself, and I saw that we are importing, together with the people, a culture that is not to be combined with our culture. And the combination of an immigration flux of hundreds of thousands of people that really belong to a culture that cannot be combined with our culture, and the fact that leftist politicians say that, well, don't say anything nasty. We are all equal. Let's sing Kumbaya together, hold hands, and not talk about nasty things, and don't demand people to integrate and to assimilate in our society, but let them have their Islamic enclaves in our cities that are not the Netherlands again, but Moroccan or Islamic enclaves in our society. And the combination of two is lethal to any free society. And we let it happen. And I don't even blame the immigrants. I blame the politicians who let it happen. I can imagine that people from Africa or Northern Africa who want a better life come to our societies. I don't want them there. But I blame the politicians that invited them. And my point, if you allow me to say those last words, is that don't make the mistake. That is what is happening in Europe today will not happen to America tomorrow. It is happening in America, and it will get far worse if you don't stop being politically correct and stop looking at Islam as another religion. It's hate, it's violence, and it has no part in our societies.
Let us finish with this, Geert Wilders. Why do you do what you do?
I do what I do for one reason, and that is to defend freedom. That is why I called my party the Party for Freedom. Freedom is the most precious of everything, and we might disagree politically between the left and the right, but if there is a force that at the end of the day wants to kill our rule of law, our civil society, our freedom, the freedom of our children, people have to stand up, whatever the consequences, and say enough is enough.
Where do you get your bravery from?
Well, it's not so much bravery, it's being realistic. And if anything you say is met with threats and violence, you know that what you are doing is something worth doing. It sounds very crazy perhaps, but if I would have criticized Christianity instead of Islam, all those things would not have happened. Which means that the real nature, the real core business of Islam is that it's very intolerant, it's very dominant, it's very totalitarian, and it's very un-Western. And if I look to my country, the Netherlands, to the people who live there, they are not racist, they are not xenophobes, but they see so many changes for the worst. When their daughters go to have a drink or to dance in the streets, they are afraid what will happen to them. The homosexuals on the street that are beaten up in Amsterdam. I mean, train drivers that are being called whores just because they are women by so many Islamic people in my country. In every aspect of our society we see changes for the worst, and I'm not even talking about everything that is happening with the Islamic State and terrorism today. And, well, those people elected me, and I believe that it's not too late. It's perhaps 5 minutes, not before, but after 12. But still, if we combine forces, and that's why it's so important that we should combine forces from America, from Australia, from Europe, and fight against it in the strongest possible way.
Geert Wilders, thank you for standing up for the persecuted people of a totalitarian ideology. Thank you for so courageously protecting and standing up for our freedom. And it was a true honor and a privilege to sit next to a hero.
Thank you for being here. It's my privilege.
Thank
really.
you. It was
Thank
a true honor, and we wish you the best in everything that you do.
Thank you so much.
Thank
it was
you.
a pleasure.
Thank you, Geert Wilders. And we hope you'll come back on the Glazov.
I certainly will.
Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next week on the Glazov Gang. Good night.